Hi guys, it's Ben from T-Rex Space Station here. How's everyone doing? And welcome to this new series in which I'm going to be taking a trip down memory lane and talking about some of my early memories of video games from the past and from my childhood. And today we're going to be focusing on the first computer, the first PC that I ever experienced, and that was the 286. So I can remember being a very young lad growing up in Manchester in a pretty small house with my brother and my parents, and I was always really intrigued by my dad's PC. And this is an old DOS-based machine. It was a 286 processor, had a very small amount of RAM, and I can remember always looking at it and being very intrigued by it. And from a pretty young age I started to dabble with the computer and explore it. I remember seeing Dad playing some video games on it, and the first thing I seem to remember him playing was a game called Mahjong, and this was old VGA style graphics, so the game was quite pink and blue and pretty garish, but the colours kind of stood out to me, and I would sit there and watch my dad playing Mahjong and think this looks really intriguing. I'd also get a bit of experience at watching my dad use commands on the DOS prompt, and I started to get kind of an idea of how you opened up different programs and bits of software on there. And I actually over time grew to really love the DOS system. I actually remember asking my dad, can I play on the computer at one point? And that was when probably I had my first or one of my earliest experiences of playing video games. So the first game that I think I played after Mahjong was Lemmings. Now everyone will know Lemmings. Lemmings is a really historic and very famous and very innovative series, and it's had various ports on consoles and on the Amiga, and my first experience was playing VGA Lemmings on the 286, and it was a very hard game for a kid to play. You know, it starts off very easy, but there are a huge number of levels in the Lemmings franchise, and as you start to get further and further in, they get absolutely devilish. But you know, I really enjoyed working out how to get those lemmings across the levels and into the safe area, and you had the different ones with different abilities, like the guys that blocked off the edges and the guys who could build, and it was a great game for a kid. Maybe a little bit too difficult for a kid, but you know, it was really fun to explore it and to kind of think about how to get through the levels. So those were the first two games I ever played on the 286. I suppose one of the more notable games that my dad had was Leisure Suit Larry, and I was definitely way too young to be playing Leisure Suit Larry. I really shouldn't have even known about it, but it was just one of the games that my dad had. This is back in the day of 3.5-inch floppies, make of that what you will, Larry. But games were often on several different discs, but I remember begging my dad to install it and he let me play it. And I think my mum was really paranoid about me playing Leisure Suit Larry, so she wanted to supervise me and watch what I was doing. And I can remember playing it a little bit and going to, it's been a long time since I completed the game, but I remember going across to this lounge club, and Larry's there's like a comedian there making really crass jokes about lesbians and stuff, and at the time I didn't even know what lesbians were, and my mum was like, that's it, sorry, but you can't play the game anymore, and that was the end of it. But you know, it sowed this little seed in my head where I was like, that was a really cool game. I found it funny, and it was even more intriguing for it as a kid, because it was an adult game that I shouldn't have been playing. But the seed was sown there. There was something about that Sierra-style approach to point-and-click adventure games or interactive games that really I fell in love with. You know, going on into the future, that would be a type of game that really had a big impact on me. And I suppose it started there as a kid, playing Leisure Suit Larry on the old 286. Now, there were some actually really good games that came with a package. I think it was called VBasic, and I think these may have been programmed by small bedroom programmers. One of those was Sammy Snake, and you know, you all know how famous the Snake games became, you know, later on the Nokia 3210, but we had a version back on DOS, and I really enjoyed it and played it for a long time. You know, as you ate more and more numbers, the snake got bigger, there were mazes to navigate around, and it was really fun and addictive. But there was another game, and this was one of the first multiplayer games that I ever experienced. And this is a game that I've done a gameplay video of very, very long time ago. And the game is called Gorilla. And Gorilla was a 2-player game. You play as these 2 gorillas standing on different buildings, and you're basically throwing bananas at the other person, and you have to kind of take into account the velocity and the distance between the 2 gorillas, and also you had to take into account the wind and things like that. So you take it in turns to type a number, for those different variables, and you try and hit the other gorilla, and you'd blow chunks out of the buildings. And I used to play that with my dad and find it really amusing and very funny. And that game was pretty ahead of its time, because it was not that different to how games like Worms and things would play later down the line. You against an opponent, firing projectiles and taking it in turns to sort of knock 7 bells out of each other. And so that was a game that I really enjoyed. The other big aspect of my gaming back in the day with those systems were shareware games. Big games companies like Apogee and stuff, and 3D Realms later, releasing games on discs, and these games were affordable and cheap. So I'd love to go down to PC World with my dad and check out the shareware games, and they would come in these sort of plastic sealed packages with bright blue discs, and I just loved those games and the whole experience of getting new ones. Some of the more notable shareware franchises for me, and one of the biggest ones was Commander Keen. These were probably one of my earlier experiences of platform games, and I really loved the Commander Keen series. If you're not familiar with Commander Keen, you play as this cool, quite goofy kid with a funny space helmet on and your trusty pogo stick, and they're sort of quirky space-related video games. There's kind of an overworld map which you travel around, and you can do the levels in a non-linear fashion, which was cool. And I really loved those games, and I used to play them with a friend from school called James Wickens, and we kind of swap discs and stuff and get a chance to play them. And that's a series that I wish would continue. Why don't we revamp Commander Keen, because that was a really good game. And thinking as well, my first introduction to first-person shooters was back in the day of the 286. I had a friend from school who somehow managed to, he knew about zipping up software, and he managed to zip up Wolfenstein 3D and give it to me on a 3.5-inch floppy, and I remember unzipping it, and he actually managed to give me the whole thing, not just the shareware version that I was used to, but the whole game with all of the episodes. And that was the first time I'd ever really owned one of those shareware games, but the full package. Because let's be honest, nobody ever dialed up the numbers to some American company and ordered the rest of the game. I mean, I don't know how well that business model really worked, but I was amazed by it, playing through each of the episodes, getting to those end-of-level bosses, the really big bosses with the chain guns, and I just was obsessed with that game. It was amazing. And there was after I played that, I went on to Blakestone, which was, I think that was the next game in the series, another first-person shooter. There was also a shareware game that added in elements. It took it from the German thing and added elements of space shooter, so you were on these space stations exploring around, and there were lots of aliens and things locked in rooms, and there were scientists and key cards and all of that stuff. And those obviously were games that went on to be such a big deal for me, and that I really got obsessed with later on. Those games weren't that far removed from Doom. Of course, it was a big frustration because I could never play Doom back on that old 286 system. I had to wait until somebody finally got a Pentium, but maybe that's a story for another day. But it was still a system. The 286 was still a computer where I started. Some of those grassroots loves for certain types of games were set, and definitely the two kinds were point-and-click adventure games in the form of Leisure Suit Larry, and also 3D shooters. There were some other point-and-click games on this 286 that people don't talk about that much these days. One of the series I remember was Hugo's Who Done It, and they played very similar to games like Leisure Suit Larry. You played as Hugo, you went around these mansions, you had the text parser to type in what you wanted to do, and they were really tricky games, and I think there were probably 3, 4 or even 5 of those games that I ended up playing back in the day on floppy disks and shareware anyway. In terms of the operating system, I remember we had Windows 3.1 back on that, and that was really my first interaction with Windows, and it's amazing that I can actually think back to when Windows was seemed like this ridiculous clunky thing that I only opened every now and then. It's like, why would I really use Windows when I can use DOS, which is better and quicker, and I know what I'm doing with it? And I would only really use Windows for certain packages. I think we had MS Paint on there, which obviously was really cool, which I would use a lot, but I wouldn't even use word processors there. We would use a DOS-based word processor. I can't even remember the name of it now. And I still remember how Windows 3.1 looked. It wasn't particularly aesthetically pleasing. And I was like, this will never catch on. Why would people want like a graphical OS when you can just type what you want to be doing and all of that stuff? My dad worked for a computer sales company back in the day, so he was like really good at the different commands on DOS. And it did take me quite a while to start to learn them. You know, like how to copy files across different disks and do slightly more complex things. But I was all about the dir/p and cd space and all that stuff. Now I do remember getting the first sound card. We managed to get a sound card installed in the 286, which was just amazing. And I had a joystick and I played the Doctor Who game, a really old Doctor Who game that you could play that was, I think, an Amiga port as well. And I remember hearing the sound coming out of the speakers and I was like, whoa, this is just mind-blowing. I had my joystick there, I had my sound blasters. I felt so impressed by how video games could be, and it transformed the experience because, you know, before that, the games on a 286, the DOS-based games, we were getting just bleeps, crappy bleeping sounds. But here we were getting something so much over and above that. It was like we've passed through the crappy bleeping sounds, and now we've got amazing full 32-bit sound or 16-bit sound. I don't know what it was, but it just transformed the experience, and playing back the games with proper sound was just class. So I really fell in love with the 286, and it was really where probably my love of video games started. It was certainly one of the first experiences that I ever had, and that was back in primary school. So, you know, you're talking 8, 9, somewhere like that. I wasn't very old. It was definitely right in the early phase of my life, and I've got some very fond memories. So maybe you guys could let me know, what were your first computers? What are your early memories of using PCs, and some of the games that you liked back then? And also let me know, did you guys like some of the same games that I did? Commander Keen and the shareware stuff. Stay tuned, because I'm going to be releasing a few more of these Trips Down Memory Lane episodes, looking at maybe other systems that I had back in the day, and just, you know, having a nice nostalgic time. Take care, guys, and I'll speak to you all soon. Bye.